Hey guys, what's happening? Courtyard mode's returning for the first session this week. Guys, today we are going to be talking about hips that are quite tight. In specifically speaking, tight hip flexors, okay? A lot of us do a lot of sitting, a lot of driving, a lot of working behind desks, etc. And also doing a lot of sports that involve a lot of hip flexion. All right, so quick one, hip flexion being this movement over here, the movement of bringing our leg up towards our torsos. Okay, over time our hip flexors can get quite tight, and what that does, it stops us from being able to extend our hips open. Okay, so if I have tight hip flexors, I'm always going to be stuck in this position here, and I won't be able to really extend open. Okay, so common kind of postures that can arise from having tight hips, we know that we can develop that anterior pelvic tilt like I've just done. So it's that position here where that arching of the lower back comes in. Why can this become a problem? Lower back pain can arise from this, guys. All right, we don't want to be stuck in a position that is outside of a neutral, and we want to try and make sure that we're nice and evenly stacked. Okay, so these hip flexors can get tight, but now the common trend these days is if you're feeling tightness, it's to automatically want to stretch and lengthen them or try and release, get a ball stuck in somewhere, and sometimes that might not always be the best route to go to. Okay, studies, research shows that the hip flexors are prone to inhibition, meaning that they naturally can be quite weak, or they get weak quite quickly. Okay, it's not like, let's say, a muscle like our calves, which are generally prone to being overactive and strong, and they don't really shut down. The hip flexors is a muscle, or are muscles which are prone to turning off, and then in result of that, the brain naturally will try and tighten those muscles up to try and keep the stability around these hips. Okay, so 9 times out of 10, when we're feeling that hip flexor tightness, depending, yes, it can be because they might be overactive, but 9 times out of 10, it can be because they are tight and weak. All right, weakness in that area. The brain will then try and spasm them up or tighten them up to create, like I've said, that stability. Okay, so how do we go about this? We've got our tight hip flexors, they're starting to tug on our lower back, starting to feel a bit achy. How do we go about now resetting them to an optimal length so that we can carry on with training and start feeling better? Okay, so we're going to go through a little routine today. What we're going to start off with is a form of lengthening, so active lengthening of those hip flexors via what we would call reciprocal inhibition. Okay, so the activating of a muscle on the opposite side, which will then have to, the muscle on the other side will have to elongate in order for that to happen. So what I'm going to do is a glute bridge. If I squeeze up into a glute bridge, with this being obviously glutes here, hip flexors are now short. As soon as I squeeze my glutes, this hip flexor will have to lengthen in order for this glute to obviously contract fully. Okay, so it's that active lengthening. So I'm not trying to stretch it open. All I'm doing is I will just try and squeeze my bum nice and tight. Reciprocally, that will inhibit this hip flexor and lengthen it. Okay, so right, what we'll do here in this position, I tilt my back down slightly and I drive up nice and tall. I squeeze my bum as tight as I can, and I can really feel these hip flexors on a little bit of stretch here. Alright, and I come down and I come up and I squeeze as hard as I can, and I come down. Guys, important here to posteriorly tilt that pelvis ever so slightly, just so that those hip flexors can get a bit of a stretch. And down. Now, how I could get this wrong is if I keep my back arched like that, and then I come up. All of that is just going into my erectors, and I'm not really stretching those hip flexors nicely. So make sure to tilt that pelvis back slightly and drive up. Okay, right, next one, which we can do, is a little bit of a split lunge complex. So what I'll do is, in this position, I am going to tilt those hips again. Okay, so I get out of that anterior tilt slightly to a posterior tilt, and I'm just looking just to come down and up, and a really big stretch will come into those hip flexors. So support yourself there, down and up, down and up. Okay, so another easy variation, if you feel that the glutes bridge is not working for you, you can move into that split lunge. What I recommend is about 2 sets of 10 to 15 reps, slow, controlled, helping to open those hips up nicely. Okay. Next up, so we've said that hip flexors are prone to inhibition, meaning that we now need to try to find a way to strengthen them so that once they are stronger, the brain won't have the need to keep them in that tight, stabilizing kind of position. They will naturally and automatically release themselves because they will be strong enough to support the structures they are meant to. Okay, so we're going to start off with a simple exercise. A little band like this. Guys, if you don't have a band like this, I do have an exercise after this, which you can use instead, but a great investment going forward to just help with a little bit of activation work. So from here, what I'm going to do, back is nice and flat, knees up at 90 degrees. From here, I'm going to extend one leg, keeping the other leg at 90 degrees, and my back nicely pressed down, and slowly up. And I push down, and slowly up. And I can feel this in the hip flexor that is on my right side, and the leg that is staying here. And up. And down. Okay. And I just transition between this position and that position. Alright. You want to get about 10 to 15 reps each side. Alright. Between 2 and 3 rounds. Last exercise which we're going to go through today before wrapping this up is if you do not have that mini band, especially now in this lockdown period, as we're slowly transitioning back into the gym, if you don't have that band, this is a great one just to help you to activate those hip flexors. Okay, so what you're going to do, get yourself in a position where you can hold on to something. I'm just holding on to my gate here, and I'm into the split stance position. From here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to squeeze my opposite glute. Sorry, let me swap around a little bit easier. I'm going to squeeze my left glute here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lift this right leg up without leaning too far back or losing my balance. Nice and tight, lift. And I'm holding, and come down. And that is going to burn really nicely just into these hip flexors and get them activated. So again, I squeeze here, I'm nice and tall, I lift, and come down. Alright, so I would say between 5 reps of about 20 seconds on each leg to get those hip flexors firing up. And guys, that is it for my little hip flexor fix. Remember, stretching and lengthening is not always the go-to, and sometimes all we need is a little bit of strength and stability around those joints. Stay tuned, we'll be back for another Courtyard Moves later this week.